support.
The maestro, please.
I got the studio fully together now and just in time to do a pop analysis. This time around, we'll be looking at Ariana Grande's Thank You Next.
Ariana Grande.
Now, we've looked at her before, long back when we were looking at Since then, she's been up to a little bit more, especially with the release of her previous album, which had 2 hits off of it, those being and
it lingers one more time. You believe God is the one. I tell you all the things.
Background.
Thank You Next was released November 3rd, 2018. Charted not long after at number 1, where it still sits today. Thank You Next is the first single off of her next album, which is going to have the same name, just not in all lowercase. Its release date has yet to be announced. The big thing about this song is that it's a pseudo-tribute to all of her past relationships. Those being ex-boyfriend and rapper Big Sean, ex-boyfriend and soccer player Ricky Alvarez, ex-fiancé and SNL comedian Pete Davidson, and ex-boyfriend and unfortunately recently passed rapper Mac Miller. Ariana Grande is giving writing credits, and she was helped out in both writing and production by Tommy Brown, Charles Anderson, Taylor Parks, Victoria Monet, and Michael Foster. Tommy Brown doesn't have a lot of chart toppers, but he does have some hits, such as
Is this the news?
I ain't started, I'm just a party. Turn it. Aye. You said at the home of the brave again.
in addition to
I'll be drunk texting you. Drunk texting you. Yeah, baby, I'll be drunk texting.
Charles Anderson, who I couldn't find an official picture of, is another one that doesn't have many hits to his name, although he does have
Yeah, I swear I'ma get it. Yo quiero dinero. Yo quiero dinero.
which he worked on along with Brown. Taylor Parks is probably the biggest one on here besides Ariana, having hits such as
You got some shit to say and I'm here to listen, so baby, tell me where your love lies. Waste a day and spend the night.
and even currently
Had to have high hopes for a living. Shooting for the stars when I couldn't make a killing. Didn't ever die, but I always had a vision. Always had high.
Victoria Monet, while not as big as Taylor Parks, is another one who's had hits to her name, such as when she is featured, like in
The world needs
Little more love.
Kells, in my hood, money equals power. And in the world, money controls everything we.
or even in just vocal production when she worked on
Let my body do the work. We can work tomorrow. We can work tomorrow.
Lastly, we have Mike Foster, who, in addition to not being able to find an official picture of, I couldn't really find any big charting hits that he's worked on either. Thank You Next is released solely by Republic.
Form.
Thank You Next is listed as both a pop and R&B song, is about 3.5 minutes in G-flat major, 4/4 time, and is 108 beats per minute. After a very short introduction, Ariana Grande tells us about her exes in the first verse.
Thought I'd end up with Sean, but it wasn't a match. Wrote some songs about Ricky.
She then goes on to tell us what she's learned from those past relationships in the first pre-chorus.
One taught me love, one taught me patience, and one taught me pain.
And then we have our first chorus.
Thank you, next, thank you, next.
The second verse focuses on herself as opposed to the people she's surrounded herself with.
I know they say I'm a one too fast, but this one gon' last, 'cause her name is Ari.
What follows is a more introspective pre-chorus.
She handles pain, that shit's amazing.
Before we get to a more layered version of the chorus.
Thank you, I'm so fucking grateful for my ass. Thank you.
She then continues though with that line to give us a post-chorus.
Thank you,
We then get a bridge, which is really just a modified version of a verse, to be honest.
I'll be thanking my dad, 'cause she grew from the drama. Only wanna do it once real bad.
And we get the last inspirational version of the pre-chorus.
That's not what I see. Look what I found. Ain't no need for searching.
Which then leads to our last version of the chorus.
I'm so fucking grateful for my ex. Thank you. Thank you. So thank you.
The outro is essentially the bridge, but it's a bit longer.
Thank you, yeah.
And the song ends with an instrumental fade out.
Synth.
The synth has three parts to it, a high, middle, and low one, but the first one we get is oddly enough the middle one. It has these intervals which it holds for a while a rhythmic motif plays over it before just going into block chords near the end. Notice though that it has naturals in the second bar which give it a bit more of a chromatic flair. The high synth does something similar, though its chords aren't sustained through each bar, and the rhythmic motifs that it does aren't exactly motifs because it's not really repeating them. Do notice though it still does natural some of those notes like the middle synth before it. Lastly, we have the low synth, which does act as a bass line when the bass itself is not present. It goes G flat, A natural, B flat, C flat before jumping down to F, so note that it still does have that natural in it. When you put them all together, you actually get to hear the full harmony, and it's actually quite interesting. It's a G flat major 7 chord going to an F dominant 7 with an A in the bass, A natural, B flat minor 7 before ending with a D flat 7 dominant chord with a C flat in the bass.
Bass.
This is one of the more fun bass lines to look at because of all the pitch bending. Regardless, for the most part, it is just going G flat, A natural, B flat before jumping all the way down to E flat and then rising to F. As far as the pitch bends go, each one always goes up 1 octave, but when it goes back down, those pitches are approximate. It sounds like the first 3 are just going down a 5th. However, the last one clearly pitch bends back down to that F. The other figure that the bass does isn't nearly as fun because it doesn't have the pitch bends. Regardless, it does go very low, which makes some of these notes hard to hear. Regardless, the basic form of the bass goes G flat, F, B flat before dropping all the way down to D flat and then going back up to F.
Verse.
She focuses very much on these triplet rhythms throughout the entirety of the verses. This opening phrase keeps starting off with that A flat, but the first one goes to F, followed by an E flat, then followed finally by a D flat.
Thought I'd end up with Sean, but it wasn't a match. Wrote some songs about Ricky, now I listen and laugh.
The second phrase kind of repeats this idea, but the triplets are more fleshed out, still focusing a lot on that A flat, but now the melodic lines just don't go down. Sometimes they go up and then down.
Even almost got married, and for Pete I'm so thankful. Wish I could say thank you to Malcolm, cause he was an angel.
She kind of repeats these ideas in following verses, but with slight variations, such as in this one, where she both times ends on that F.
Spend more time with my friends, I ain't worried about nothing. Plus I met someone else, we having better discussions.
Or in this one, where she very much plays with the going up and down of the melodic line, and does even some more altered, drawn-out rhythms.
I know they say I move on too fast, but this one gon' last, cause her name is Ari, and I'm so good with that.
Pre-chorus.
This is the section she varies the most, in part because it's the section that occurs the most number of times. Regardless, it's spanning that high A flat in the middle of the staff all the way down to that A flat below the staff. Notice how she has certain melismas on like love or on pain.
One taught me love, one taught me patience, and one taught me pain. Now I'm so amazing.
The second phrase adds even more melismas. Still, her highest note is that A flat, although in the second part of the phrase she only gets as low as a B flat.
I've loved and I've lost, but that's not what I see. So look what I got, look what you taught me. Yeah, boy.
The second time she does it, at least the first phrase is pretty similar, minus one rhythmic alteration.
She taught me love, she taught me patience, how she handles pain. That shit's amazing.
The second phrase, though, is the most altered. Notice how she naturals some of the notes to give it more flavor, and notice how the end, it doesn't go down as far as it did before. The and for part is still the same, but notice the octave leap before she does the melisma on say.
I've loved in our lives, but that's not what I see. 'Cause look what I found. No need for searching, give all that I say.
The last pre-chorus has some alterations as well. Notice in the first phrase on pain, she does a melisma up as opposed to a melisma down.
I got so much love, got so much patience. Learned from the pain, it turned out amazing.
Now we have a bunch of melismas, and they've reversed the melodic lines, in some cases going up as opposed to down, and notice the last part on the and for that I say. The and for still goes up, that I continues to go up, and the say melisma isn't nearly as low as it was before.
That's not what I see. Look what I found. Ain't no need for searching, give all that I say.
Chorus.
This is the most simplistic part of the song. It's really just F and E flat. That F A flat minor third interval that you're seeing only happens in the first chorus. The more interesting part is the end of the phrase, when it goes from that high D flat all the way to the B flat below the staff.
Thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you, next. I'm so fucking grateful for my ex.
The chorus, at least the first time, is repeated exactly as it does, only it has the last two beats of that last phrase cut off.
Thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you, next. I'm so fucking.
When the chorus comes back later, it really only gets more complicated because of layered improvisatory elements that Ariana Grande does over it. The big thing, though, is that here the F-A flat interval was removed, probably to make way for the improvisatory elements, and the ending phrase is changed, just doing a B flat, A flat figure, but notice how the rhythm at the end is changed as well.
Thank you, thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you. I'm so fucking grateful for my ex.
Post-chorus.
As far as the post-chorus goes, which is also the outro, it just takes what was done in the chorus and makes it a bit more melodic. Now it starts at an A flat and drops down to an E flat, and notice the melisma at the end before she goes back into the phrase that we saw in the chorus.
Thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you, next. I'm so fucking.
Bridge.
The bridge is really just another verse. The only reason it's called a bridge is because the instrumentation very much thins out. As you can see, it's still those triplet figures based around the A flat and descending lines.
One day I'll walk down the aisle, hold the hands of my mama. I'll be thanking my dad, 'cause she grew from the drama.
The bridge continues to essentially be just another verse, but I left this part in here because she's very aware that this song was apparently going to be on top of the charts.
Only wanna do it once real bad, go make that shit last. God forbid something happens, at least this song is a smash.
This now makes the second Ariana Grande track that I've analyzed. Doing a lot of rappers lately, and that really just leads itself to rhythmic analysis as opposed to a singer when I get to do melodic analysis. Regardless, she released a song and it got to #1 and it gave me something fun to look at. And for that,
I'll say thank you, thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you. I'm so fucking grateful for my ex. Thank you, thank you, next, thank you.
so she made a song about all 4 of her exes. I know Taylor Swift makes songs about her exes. She could make one for all of them, couldn't she? I mean, how long would that be? How many exes does she have? Oh.
So thank you, next. I'm so fucking grateful for my ex.